The Road to Oranmore, a short story by Grant J. Riley from the book Marginal. "22 hours later, or thereabouts, Danny eventually gets off the bus. It's a long way to Tipperary, even further to Galway. You will just have to excuse the puns at this stage. Danny greets the sun with a stretch of relief and steps out with the same wobbly legs as he had on the ferry at dawn. It's just gone 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's bright and blustery in that familiar West Coast way. He counts the change in his pocket. Danny has enough for a pint and a packet of fags. That'll be the last of the money, so he might as well spend it in style. He steps off the back street, just past Eyre Square, and into the familiar underwhelmment of an afternoon bar. One man slumps as another checks his paper against the racing horses on a TV screen, which is perched high up in a far corner. A radio just about drowns out that sound of the sports commentator. A bartender, drying a glass with a tea towel, looks up as Danny strolls in, like it's the Wild West.
Walking down Madison, I swear I never had a gun. No one ever shot no one, I was only having fun. Walking down Madison.
Young Danny takes a wooden stool at a wooden bar and orders a pint of stout. The tired traveller uses the time whilst his pint settles before the bartender returns to give it a head. Danny gets up and approaches a cigarette machine. He puts in his coins and a few fall out. He has mixed up his denominations. Some English change is rejected from the machine. This time he gets the money right and is rewarded with a wide green and white packet of majors and returns to the bar. His now ready pint sits gallant on a beer mat, momentarily admired, then gracefully he sups with his eyes closed.
Walking down Madison, I swear I never had a gun. No one ever shot no one, I was only having fun. Walking down Madison, swear I never had a gun. I was philosophizing some, checking out the bums. See, you give them your nickels, your pennies and dimes, but you can't give them up in these mercenary times.
The song is in New York, but it's not lost on Danny. He is in the opposite port, just the Atlantic apart. Kirsty MacColl singing is a movement and unfamiliar streets. It's his movement too. This is where Danny is actually moving, again and at last.
On the A train, it's not that far. From the sharks in the penthouse to the rats in the basement, it's not that far.
Refreshed by his pint, topped up from the fill he had had on the ferry first thing this morning, along with all those homecoming songs for the Irish, he takes one last look at the white suds that slide down the innards of his now empty pint glass. He stands up, leaves the bar unnoticed. It's festival time, and the summer is at its best for these parts. The streets are lined with bunting and an abundance of visitors and shoppers. He strolls towards the centre with his rucksack slung over one shoulder. Light in his step, slightly swaggered, Danny is still walking down Madison with Kirsty. He whistles along to the tune in his head and eagerly anticipates the months ahead. On these cobbled and narrowed back streets he comes across a crowd on a crossroad. Buskers, good ones. They hold the attention of a surprisingly large crowd of onlookers. A penny whistler sits on the floor cross-legged as a mandolin takes the lead, and a baram player thumps along perfectly with a tipper made from bone. It is the familiar sound of here. A barefoot, waistcoated young type with cut short trousers impresses all with a Diablo. Danny has seen it all before, but this particular performer holds his attention. He flings high his Diablo above the crowd, spinning so fast it looks out of control. A bit risky, Danny decides, but looks on with a respectful smirk. To smash someone in the face with a missile at that speed would definitely be show over and probably a run down the street. But this character has the bravado and the skill to land his craft on the bunting line 10 feet above the crowd. Whoops and jeers and hands clap as the crowd watch the colourful spinning top as it follows the line of bunting across the street. A quick parting is made as the jester runs under the line to the other side of the road. He is just in time when the Diablo begins to slow. As a tightrope walker loses the balance, the spinning device falls back down to earth and is expertly caught on a cord between two sticks. Spun quickly, flicked a few times for more speed and effect, and the street performer tosses the spinning top high into the air once more. The crowd adore him. At any other time, they probably wouldn't even look him in the eye. Fair play, fair play. Danny joins in with the clapping and slides his way over to the buskers as the crowd now throws coins at the show. The musicians pack their things away while a few others linger with their dogs on strings. A woman, a small child and a lurcher hound all stand staring out into different bits of space. And this is who Danny tentatively approaches. But they're friendly. The woman engages in some chit-chat. Nice show and all that. Her accent distracts Danny. Northern, yet West Country. Perhaps Welsh borders. He is not sure. Mary, her name turns out to be, is the wealth of information that Danny had sought. He is relieved to have found some source of news this quickly and is keen to join the others. However, the news is a mixed blessing. Trouble with the law. Mary gives details of the previous days, the guard blocking last year's camp, a few scenes out on the road. Some vehicles had managed to find a small camp to park up, but there was no grazing, and a big group of horses had to gather 8 or 9 miles down the road, maybe more, on the coast. This is not the news Danny had wanted or expected to hear. Neither is it a surprise. It's always like that, and so Danny musters another plan. With no money, no taxi, and probably too long to walk before it gets dark, Danny takes up Mary's offer to go back to her site nearby and see what they can find. The site is squashed in wasteland, surprisingly close to town. A few trucks, a van and a large coach are parked in line next to mounds of recently dumped soil. The long grey and white coach sits low on its suspension and has a cartoon painted near the front door. Roadrunner from the Looney Tunes. This was a very fast bus back in the day, Mary assures Danny with an ironic smile as they enter through its double doors. The vehicle is packed, part session, part slumber. The calculations in Danny's mind are quick to deduce that there is nowhere to sleep here tonight. Danny ponders tagging on to this session. Maybe a few drinks and a laugh, alright, but it's obviously overcrowded and you'd be lucky if you got a kip down on a dog's blanket for the night. Danny looks out the door at the broken concrete track. He looks up at the gathering dark clouds in the sky and rules sleeping outside. He's got to keep moving. So he brings the subject up. Sniggers and jeers and "you're fucked, man" are all they can offer. Danny begins to regret the turn of events. It's a shit road to hitchhike and deadly in the dark. But Mary has a plan and offers Danny one of the kids' bikes, a red BMX. It will have to do. And so our weary traveller accepts his position and without further ado adjusts his rucksack upon his back, which feels bigger than the bike itself, and pedals off. There is no sitting down. The saddle feels like miles from his arse. There's only one speed, full speed. He just has to pedal fast. By and by, through the centre, the suburbs and the sprawl, he now takes the road west and then south out of the town. He joins the N18, all quiet except for one tractor, and crosses some bogs, but it's turning out to be much further than he thought. Into drizzle he pedals furiously some more. His legs begin to protest. He eventually reaches the place they call Oranmore. There is not a soul in sight. He reluctantly accepts that there is still a way to go just to get to the bay, so he follows his nose towards the coast. Thirsty and sweating heavily, he's relieved to find an old cast iron pump at a spring beyond the edge of the town. Dismounting, he throws his now heavier rucksack to the ground and briefly rubs his shoulders. He takes the serifed metal arm and begins to pump up some water. As the first drops appear, he examines them in one hand. He temporarily stops pumping, pokes the water with his finger and looks closely at the remaining contents. A few specks, no sheen. He pumps harder and the water comes through good and clean. He fills one hand and sups enthusiastically, but soon surrenders to sticking his head under the flow, just still managing to extract the water with a pump handle in the other hand. Cooled and refreshed, he heads off once again. Out onto the barren and bleak coastal backtracks that seem seldom used. He can sense the edge of the land, smell that not so far off sea, but it's becoming unclear as to which way to go. A crossroads is reached, no signposts at all, and the same view in every direction with not a person to be seen. "Just give us a scent," the young rider pleads to the sky. He dismounts, throws off the rucksack once more, followed by the bike onto a grassy verge. He stands very alone in the middle of the four roads, hands on hips. No time to get lost. Soon it will be dark and a night in a field will be a wet one by the look of the incoming clouds. One road can be eliminated. Hopefully, the one that's just been ridden down, so that leaves three. The sun slowly sinks behind murky mists, but it's out to the west, over the sea, and offers little in the way of clues. Danny knows it's all coast with many meanders and bays. To keep your bearings is not going to be easy around here. He walks a few minutes south, turns around, and returns to where he started. He walks north, turns around, and heads back to his original spot. "Go west, young man, go west." And then Danny spots his gold. Horseshit, lying lumped in the middle of the fourth road. It's fresh as well. Danny now knows that this is the way. He jubilantly continues on his quest. Yet doubt quickly seeps in. What if this is from a single horse? A local rider out for a jock? But then more manure. His doubt extends to possibly two horses that might have been ridden out. But then he sees one of the equine deposits has been flattened by cartwheels, and he is now suitably convinced he is on the right track. He picks up speed and cycles past more and more signs dropped on the road, like Hansel and Gretel's breadcrumbs, showing him the way home. Eventually, he reaches the top of a dirt track which drops down towards the bay. He can see smoke rising from the camp. With less than an hour or so of light left, what a day. Standing for a moment, bike held between his wobbly legs, Danny takes in the scene in front of him. That's a lot of wagons, maybe 20 or more, all parked in a semicircle, all tucked away in a corner following the contours of a stone wall and the hedge line. The green tarpaulin covers upon colourful carriages of all shapes and sizes sets a remarkable sight. He recognises most, names them to himself, but not all. Amber shafts from the setting sun punch through the broody clouds and illuminate the camp with a gorgeous, soft evening light. There is a long green peninsula that curls out into the sea and an inlet that has formed a small lake. There are horses, lots of them, too many to count right now. They are untethered and graze freely alongside goats and chickens in this self-contained camp. And of course, it's full of people, dogs and kids. The spectacle is most impressive. Danny rubs his face, quickly recovers himself from his moment of sentimentality and boldly remounts once more. The first of the dogs bark and soon gather into a fearsome pack. Danny offers his hand to the first few, the ones he knows from time. The hounds do their thing and all seem to agree that he is welcome, so they let him through. Except for an old, persistent one at the back that is now shouted at by somebody nearby. Faces look up from squatted positions around the fire. Buckets, pans, suds and water. It's clear-up time after dinner. Recognition dawns on the various faces and they all soon gather around. There are some welcome embraces from the women and big slaps on the back from the big men who have now begun to appear in the camp. The slaps and the hugs get harder as the closer the family gets. It's a joyous reunion, but brief, as early tasks are to be tended to and all get back to their chores. Except now the hearty and round Mikey encourages Danny to follow him by the command of his waving hand and a tilted head gesture. He was one never for many words. There you go. Mikey directs his deep afflone tone and throws back the cover off his four-wheeler cart. "Tarp, enough poles, you might have to black some string, and here look, an old stove. Let's see if we can find you a stack pipe." "Ah, nice one, bless you," Danny gratefully replies as Mikey leaves him to it. Looking up at the sky, Danny already knows he better be quick and sets about looking for a pitch nearby. He finds a good spot just off the back of the wagon circle and nicely tucked into the banked hedge. He now judges the prevailing wind, which is fair obvious as they are down on the coast, but he needs to get it right. If he doesn't, he will be woken up in the night by some nasty surprises. Taking a hazel pole in hand, he now paces and mentally maps out his camp. Testing the ground by stabbing with a stick. Yep, good enough. He returns to the fire in search of some tools. Cup of tea? Eve holds one out, as if by magic, as Danny approaches the fire. Timely, they smile at each other. "I'll need a stake, a hammer and some string," Danny requests, as all he has got is his optional knife. As the light goes down and the night draws in, the tired traveller looks up above. Venus is the first to show herself in the evening sky. He looks back at his bender tent and thinks, not bad, it'll do. It's very basic, just the poles and the tarp, his rucksack now thrown in on the grass, but it's hardly home yet. Then Mikey reappears with a fold of carpet and 2 deer skins that puts a smile on Danny's face. They fix the stove in, having borrowed some flexi pipe, a bow saw and saw some half-decent firewood. Danny is modest, but knows their generosity will only last this night, until he sorts himself out. He knows the fine line between a welcome guest and a burden all too well. The stove is primitive, thin, cut tin with the paint burnt off. It is placed on a large stove that had been found in the hedge, but it draws a treat and dries off the eternal damp of the west coast, a greater necessity than providing heat at this time of year. The wood burner is a bit of a death trap, soon glowing bright red. An unhealthy combination of sharp edges of metal for doors and a loose fitting stack pipe, but it'll have to do for the night. The young lad rolls out his army surplus sleeping bag, feels snug, pulls over the front of his bender and goes straight to sleep. The deep slumber ends, amidst all of the early morning sounds. A bleating goat, a crying baby, a squalling cockerel and a few already up and running kids. Danny can also make out the sound of coffee being ground. Stepping straight out into the dense early morning dew, the pressure so high in the sky it seems far away. It's a perfect morning in every way. Gathered around the fire pit sat an old metal trunks, the food boxes, and all are trying not to watch the kettle. The intimacy of the camp unfolds for the day. There is no greeting your neighbours after a shower and a spruce. Out here you all rise together, bed hair, bleary eyes, one and all. Thick, black, hot coffee is poured into Danny's mug as others opt for Barry's Gold Blend loose leaf tea with a splash of fresh goat's milk. The caffeine works instantly and our refreshed traveller begins to tell his tales. Not much news reaches these parts, with only a few passing through here and there. Big sights on European riverbeds and in La Linea too, the front line, he orates. Good parties in the valley, all happening down in Andalucia, and over the border, the dwellers around the lakes of Santa Clara have to get a mention too. His tales roll on as more coffee is poured and details of England are what most are keen to hear. Huge raves, reclaimed streets, and people living in trees. He saves the worst for last as he knows this is what they want to hear. and each gets to relish their freedom and their choices on this bright and beautiful morning on the beach, about as far west as you can get. The terminal Toryism, the criminal justice bill, and the braying morons of the British press. Danny purposefully and chronologically reads the news. All now appear appeased and relieved to be so far away from the rot. Stories are exchanged and Danny gets to hear their news. It reads like the guest list for Noah's Ark. This baby born here and that baby over there, those puppies here and these kids over there, and then this mare and that horse and these colts have been bred. The most amazing foals so far. Their listings are extensive. He takes in the scene, fertility all around. As nervy chicks peck around his feet, he looks up to the 3 recently born babies around the fire and smiles. There are young animals and children everywhere. It is now summer. It must have been a hell of a spring. Life pumps around the camp. The thwack of a schlitter on a hurley stick resounds from just outside the camp. 2 tall and lean Irish lads, Muller and Jimmy Mulligan, lob and hurl together. The ground now thuds as Mikey is joined by Red Brendan, both mounted high on their horses, 1 mare and 1 stallion respectively. The hefty and hairy-footed piebalds come closer to the fire. It's an incredible height, especially when viewed from sitting down. To look up at the rider sat above 15 or more hands. They both ride bareback, tilted backwards, bollocks tucked up, reins held high, for a good look as much as anything else. Come on, let's take the horses for a swim, hollers Mikey as he leads his horse about face and turns away from the fire. No time but this moment, and all immediately get up and go. 1 by 1, riders gather on their finest. Excited animals call out to each other. Neighs start to echo around the bay. A few stand tall on their stallions. Others now appear on weighty and long-haired mares. Long flowing socks of white coarse manes, some with big tashies, piebalds, skewbalds, a grand looking bunch. What you got for me? Yells out Danny, still on terra firma and need of a horse. Trivet Dave runs past, alongside his mare, John Wayne style, and leaps, mounts and shouts to Danny, "Take the blue one over there," and simultaneously points as he rides on. Old Jim Pickens oversees the whole escapade through his thick lens specs, making sure that all are mounted before he commits to join at the back of the pack. A sturdy pony is chasing the herd. Danny loses no time, takes probably his one and only chance and throws himself at the mare. He lands flat, chest on mane, and is quick to realise she has no halter or indeed any reins. The others now untangle from their cluster and the big horses lead out into the peninsula first. The wide grassy ground juts out into the calmly lapping sea. The sun rises magnificently and with great synchronicity and now begins to warm the bay. It's a procession. Everyone and everything instinctively joins in. The row of horses are joined by curious goats looking for new things to eat, and the dogs are having a great day. Even the chickens and the bantams decide to join in to the occasion. Each animal follows the other, safety in numbers or just up for the crack. A few mums are left at the back, maybe a little bit jealous, but smiling as they hold on to their babies and toddlers, relishing the unfolding spectacle. There are 10 or more riders. Danny can't look up to count. His mare is feisty and is kicking up a fuss. He talks to her. He is close, clinging onto her mane, knees tucked into her flanks. Come on now, easy as you go. Look, I'm Danny, it's okay, we're going to be okay. Let's do this together. The rider introduces himself as the young mare can't decide if it's a rodeo or a jock. He tries to sit up. Long mane hairs grasp between his fingers. She bucks, she rears. Animals melodramatically neigh at each other, part excitement, part fear. Some of the lead stallions rise up on hind legs at the front, their riders deft, but only just in control. But not our Danny, as his bucking bronco does her best to shake him off. At the back of the parade, it's a bumpy old ride. He is used to it, he can handle it, but she is giving him a really hard time. He leans his full body weight forward again as the mare raises up once more. Brendan is the first one in. The heavy horse, shin deep in seawater, navigates between the stones and the sand. They don't seem to like it, the first bit, trepid, reluctant, but they go for it once they're in. It's not long before Brendan's horse is submerged in the water, and so is he, to about waist deep. Holding its neck out long, the stallion's eyeballs are protruding and white, nostrils flared and teeth showing in a weird grimace. He now doggy paddles in that peculiar way horses swim. To come off at this stage would be lethal for a rider. To fall into the back hooves of a beast of this size while swimming is potentially deadly by a kick to the head. Now Mikey manages to coerce his stallion into the sea, soon joined by Trivet Dave, then Jim Pickens and all the rest soon follow. It is the grandest of sights. A sea of horses' heads bob about the bay. Meanwhile, our Danny is still struggling at the back, even more compromised now. This strange blue mare, led by her instincts, has followed the pack, but really she does not like the look of the water. Danny is having a hard time. It's part laughter, part frustration, but mainly fear. But his dignity is still just about intact. And with the sheerest of determination, our hero leads the horse to the water. She tentatively steps in, but not without a final buck and a rear. Danny loses his knee hold and is not quite sure how he's managed to cling on. He lies almost flat upon her back as she rises on her hind legs. And then she is in, all of a sudden, and swims. The frantic mania now astonishingly replaced by the weightless buoyancy of the sea. As if stepping out of a wind tunnel, all around is suddenly and abruptly peaceful. The pair float admirably, but only momentarily. It does not last long. But just as Danny had finally managed to persuade his charge that she would really like a dip in the sea, the rest of the crew have already had their wash and now begin racing back towards the camp. The thunderous rumble of heavy hooves on sandy grass pumps by, and Danny's mare is straight out the water and starts chasing for her life after the rest of the herd. A long, narrow strip of charging beasts breaks into gallops along the peninsula and race back to the camp. Goats scatter and bleat, chickens flap and squawk, and one bucking horse and rider follows sporadically at the rear. Coming in last, riding a blue pony, behaving more like a spring lamb than a horse, Danny finally catches up with the rest. He's hysterical with laughter and terror synonymously, and now the halted others watch the last horse finish. Everyone is exploding with amusement, tears, roars and jeers all around. "She's only just come off Connemara Moor," shouts Trivet Dave with hilarity. Danny is instantly stern and straight-faced. It's all happened too fast to sink in, but he gets it now. He looks over to old Jim Pickens as appealing to a referee. "You're still young enough to bounce, lad," old Jim concedes. Danny slowly joins the laughing, relieved to have gotten home intact, and promptly jumps off the young mare and sets her free once more.